Hello and good evening. This year, on November 11th, I was doing some research through the Canadian Archives and through their electronic records section. It seems like they were doing a fair amount of effort to get everything scanned and set aside and archived on their website. And I managed to come across an old war diary of the 2nd Battalion Canadian Railway troops, of which my great-grandfather was a lieutenant. And included in that war diary, not only is there a day-to-day account of everything that took place, everything that they did, so on and so forth, all the way up from 1916 to mid-1918. But there's also a written, and I'm not sure if published, full history of the battalion up to that point. I also managed to find some old footage of that same battalion as they were being shipped out in 1916, walking from Newmarket to down Yonge Street into Toronto, and the formation of the battalion itself, along with other materials such as maps, locations, all that stuff. And there's some really interesting accounts in there of some very major historical events. So I thought, hey, may as well share all this stuff because it's some really interesting stuff, and otherwise it would just kind of be stuck in the annals of some archive somewhere. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read through the short history of the 127th Battalion, York Rangers, as it goes all the way from early 1916 through 1918, and I'm going to use background footage of the battalion itself, along with maps of where they were, pictures from their time in the front, all included in this war diary on the Government of Canada's website, the Archive of Canada's website. And hopefully this is going to get done by next year. Anyway, here we go. Okay, as we start, please keep in mind this is from the words of the battalion scribe, I guess, record keeper. So this is written from the perspective in somebody from the early 20th century. So the language is going to be a little bit weird. The sayings are going to be a little bit weird. But we'll see how this goes. Okay. The 2nd Battalion Canadian Railway Troops was originally the 127th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Forces. The battalion was organized from the 12th Regiment York Rangers of the Canadian Militia, one of the oldest and certainly the most historic regiment in Canada, whose early history dates back to 1812. Where it distinguished itself under General Sir Isaac Brock. The same spirit has been evident since that time in the various military affairs connected to the history of Upper Canada and the province of Ontario. The early pioneers of the province were, to a great extent, discharged Imperial Army men, and it is therefore not surprising that they should take an active interest in the military organization of their community, and with them take up arms in the various expeditions up to the present time being 1916. It is a significant fact that to compare the minimum role of the 2nd Battalion Canadian Railway Troops with the early records on file dating back over a century is to find the names of many of the old members who were active at that time and whose spirit still lives on in their ancestors. This is a point which, unfortunately to a great extent, lost sight of in the Canadian Expeditionary Forces, where the history and the province of the regiment the battalions arose from is broken when the battalion is set aside as reinforcements to others in the field. The 127th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Forces was authorized by Militia Order in Council in November 1915, with Lieutenant Colonel F.F. Clark commanding. Recruiting was commenced on December 1st, 1915, within the area allocated in the County of York. Depots were opened on various dates in the towns and villages, and the battalion was mobilized at Newmarket, Ontario on Sunday, April 9th, 1916. From Newmarket on Monday, April 10th, the battalion commenced a trek down Yonge Street, the main thoroughfare through the county, to a specialized prepared barracks in New Kodak buildings at Mount Dennis. It was a historic repetition of the mobilization of the same regiment in 1812 when they too marched down Yonge Street to muddy York. The preliminary training of the battalion began at Kodak Barracks, where the battalion pioneers had made all necessary preparations for accommodating 1,100 men. After weeks of infantry training, the battalion moved under canvas to a camp near Weston, where special attention was paid to layering out a model camp. It was here that they were first termed a battalion of engineers, as all the drainage, water supply, bathhouses, latrines, and kitchens were of original design, and it was highly commented on by divisional headquarters. In July 1916, the battalion was moved to Borden Camp, Canada, and for 5 weeks carried out their final training before proceeding overseas. On August 18th, the battalion entertained at Borden Camp, and on August 21st, 2016, embarked at Halifax, Nova Scotia for England, arriving at Liverpool on August 30th. The battalion arrived at Whitley Camp, Surrey on August 31st, where infantry training was carried out until the second week in October. In the meantime, the operations on the Somme caused a severe drain on the Canadian reinforcements then in England, and the 127th Battalion was instructed to prepare to proceed to Thorncliffe at an early date. All hope of becoming a battalion in the 5th Division had now vanished, and Lieutenant Colonel Clark at once proceeded to Canadian Headquarters, London, in an endeavour to have the battalion turned into a pioneer unit. He took with him records showing the classifications of his officers, 22 of which had been engaged in engineering and contracting work in civil life. He also had the trades of the men of the battalion summed up under various headings, and it was shown that over 800 men had either worked on railroads or other construction work. This was due to the fact that at the time the recruiting of the battalion and a large number of the men employed on the construction work had been laid off, and being known to Colonel Clark in civilian life, enlisted in his battalion. A little encouragement was given to the battalion by Canadian headquarters, and for the time being the unit was struck off the list of reinforcements and told to continue their infantry training. Shortly after, the 1st Canadian Construction Battalion arrived with a great number of men unfit for overseas service. An order was issued by Canadian headquarters that the 127th Battalion should supply sufficient men to the 1st Construction Battalion to bring them up to strength and thus enable them to proceed to France at once. This caused a loss to the battalion of 2 officers and 365 other rank and file, including the battalion sergeant major and 1 company sergeant major. Though strong presentments were made to Canadian headquarters that a battalion well trained and organized be broken up to reinforce a junior unit of a similar kind, no further action was taken. In return for the men transferred to the 1st Construction Battalion, we received from the unit about 200 men, who had failed to pass the dental examination for overseas, and it was our duty now to have the draft men from the 1st Construction properly treated in order to proceed overseas if the opportunity arrived. Accordingly, on October 26, the 1st Canadian Construction Battalion proceeded to France, taking with them 1/3 of the total strength of the 127th. During the next few weeks, the battalion was, for the most part, used on instruction staffs. Major Gibson, Lieutenant Ritchie, and 2 sergeants had been conducting the engineering school at Whitley Camp, where the battalion was in training, were given instructions in the building of trenches and the erection of wire entanglements. Captain Adams, likewise, was employed as instructor at the bombing school. Captain Anderson was assistant staff captain of the Canadian Division in training. Lieutenant H.B.W. Smith was divisional instructor in the physical training and bayonet fighting, and Lieutenant McGee instructed in musketry and Aldershot training school. Major Craig and Captain Flood took 3-week course at Chelsea Barracks, London, Lieutenant Brunton, Lieutenant Clark, and Lieutenant Knox taking a 6-week course for officers at Borden Camp, England. Lieutenant Johnson was brigade transport officer at Whitley Camp, and 8 sergeants were instructors at the musketry camp in Longmoor. The remaining officers and men were employed in constructing trenches for training purposes at Oakley Commons. About the 1st of November, the battalion was moved to Bramshott Camp, where the field training was continued. About the middle of November, it appeared in divisional orders that the 127th was to be reorganized a railway troop, and on November 25th, the battalion was moved to Borden Camp to establish a railway troop depot there. From November 25th to January 11th, the time of the battalion was taken up in reorganizing and outfitting the men as railway troops. New drafts were arriving from the different training depots of men suitable for railway work, and when the vacancy of the battalion had been filled, a depot company was organized under Major Agnew to form the nucleus of a new battalion. Considerable delay was caused in obtaining the necessary stores in order to finish equipping the men. New mob, store tables had to be provided by the War Office, and considerable equipment procured to railway troops had to be specially obtained. This took time. However, on January 11th, the base company under Major Agnew moved to the new railroad headquarters at Purefleet, and on January 11th, the 127th entrained at Borden for Southampton, arriving at Le Havre, France, at midnight on the 12th and 13th of January 1917. On disembarking at Le Havre, the battalion was met by guides and marched to the service rest camp 5½ miles away. The road was for the most part uphill, and as many of the men had been seasick, the march proved to be very trying, and the cold rain added to their discomfort. At 4:30 a.m., we arrived in camp only to find thoroughsome mismanagement, as we had not expected, and no accommodation was available for us. Before 7 a.m., however, the men found shelter in the YMCA huts and store buildings connected with the camp. On Monday, January 15th, the battalion entrained for the interior, and at midnight on the 16th, detrained at Auxy-le-Château, and marched into buildings at Brûle-aux-Bois, arriving there at 3 a.m. The representatives of the battalion left at once and motored to Achot to report the arrival of the battalion to the ADLR, 5th Army, and had received instructions. The remainder of the battalion were left at Billay-au-Brûle-aux-Bois, and attachments were moved forward as the work developed. D Company was detailed to the work on Ancourt Valley, C Company to the yards at Aucheux, B Company to the area between Beaux-Arts, and A Company Collins Camp and Le Sarre. The battalion headquarters was finally established near Achot. Before we continue on with the diary, there's an enclosed letter in here from the commanding officer detailing the time and date that they got into the field, so I'm just going to read that out. Standing orders by Lieutenant Colonel F.F. Clark, Commanding Officer, 2nd Battalion, Canadian Railway Troops. The 127th Battalion, Canadian Infantry, Canadian Expeditionary Forces is now known as the 2nd Battalion, Canadian Railway Troops, British Expeditionary Forces. The 127th Battalion cap and collar bridges must be worn in the respective places and Canada badge only on the shoulder stripes. A badge of cloth will be issued and worn to designate Canadian Railway Troops. This will be sewn on the upper center back, just below the collar. The date of landing in France is January 13th, 1917. Service in the field to count from that date. It is the sincere wish of the officer commanding that all ranks make themselves thoroughly acquainted with all the branches of the work in which they are engaged, that the best possible result can be obtained for the battalion's credit. Also, that we maintain the name we established as an infantry unit while training is such, and not forget that the principles laid down then, so that all remake work in harmony and persistence. Each man to consider himself an expert in the line of work allotted to him, and can be given a party of unskilled labor to work under his discretion. All acting NCOs who have shown integrity and adaptability in their work, the commanding officer will be pleased to confirm in their rank as they attain that standard on recommendation of their company commanders. We are a unique battalion in that far we have had infantry training and have also railway experience, so that all previous records made by other railway battalions should be lowered by this 2nd Battalion, Canadian Railway Troops, in railway work, etc. The organization of the battalion, Canadian Railway Troops, is divided into 1st Engineering, 2nd Administration. For the better accomplishment of the work, the company, being the unit of the work, has the same organization. Watermarked HQ, 2nd Battalion, April 8th, 1917, Canadian Railway Troops. So that's the end of the introduction. I didn't realize it was going to take this long. That paper is about 36 pages, and so far we've covered about 4 of them. So I think this is going to have to be broken down to a couple episodes. Obviously, don't have enough footage of just this company to cover 36 more pages of this publication. So what I might do is include some of the maps that are in there, some of the pictures. I'll have to Google some historical pictures of the events that are going on. Worst case scenario, I might have to use footage of maybe They Shall Not Grow Old and just kind of dub over that if I'm able to. We'll figure it out though. Anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you again soon. And again, hopefully this gets done by November 11th of next year. All right, have a good one.